Hi everyone, happy Thursday. I am back with chapter 17 and 18. So we left off on them finding the dwarf again, and he's led them to this cavern. So let's find out what happens. Chapter 17 is called Dwarf Caverns. The tunnels smelled of stale earth and mold. Within 5 steps, we were submerged in pitch black. The only thing to guide us was the dwarf's insults echoing from the stone walls. It sounded like there were several dwarfs speaking instead of one. I heard the words ugly, stupid, vile, putrid, and witch over and over. Goldie held tight to my hand, and Wolf walked closely to my other side. His calm gave me reassurance, though the darkness was unsettling. Each step felt treacherous. "This place is creepy," said Goldie. "Do you think he's trying to get us lost or killed?" "No, he can't," I said with confidence. "He's bound to take us where we tell." Ugh! I tripped on some loose stone. I caught myself on Wolf, but yanked Goldie down with me, and we tumbled to a heap. Goldie let loose of the ear-splitting scream, made 10 times louder by the cave. "Help! The cave's collapsing! We're dying!" "Quiet, Goldie, I tripped." Goldie stopped screaming, but she continued to whimper and breathe in short, erratic gasps. "I want to get out of here. I don't like this dark." "Calm down. As long as we follow the dwarf, we'll be fine." As soon as I said this, I realized I could no longer hear the dwarf. He hadn't stopped talking. I listened for footsteps, but didn't hear any other sound. "Dwarf," I called, "where are you?" Goldie clutched my arm. "He left us here to rot." "He can't leave us here to rot," I said, but my heart sped up. Maybe he'd made a turn and we missed it. "Follow me," said Wolf, and he pressed on without me. "Wolf, wait!" "Come," said Wolf. "Don't be afraid." Then his presence faded from me, and I instantly felt exposed and alone. The darkness was so complete I almost felt like it didn't exist, except Goldie's hand crushing mine. "Ouch, Goldie, not so tight." "I don't want to die." "You're not going to die. We just need to find the wall, and then we should be able to feel our way along the sides of the cave. You take the right side, and I'll take the left." Goldie reluctantly let go of me, and we walked all the way along the cave's opposite walls, feeling for any curve or corner that would lead to another where the dwarf and Wolf might have gone, but we felt nothing. "I think we should go back. I do not think this is a good idea." "Ah!" Goldie's scream faded in a way that didn't sound natural, as if she had been swallowed. "Goldie?" My heart beat faster. It was so loud now it was echoing off the walls. I took another tentative step, and suddenly there was nothing beneath my feet. Cold, dank air whooshed in my ears. I was plummeting down into a deep, dark hole. Down, down, down I went, my thoughts, memories rushing as I descended, and then in the darkness I saw the faintest glow, and flump! I landed in a pile of something like sawdust. Lantern light spilled over my surroundings. I found I had to shield my eyes. Not too far away from me was Goldie, coughing and covered in a black filth of whatever we landed in. It looked like ashes and soot. Wolf was at the bottom of the pile, wagging his tail, and he was getting around surprisingly well with his injury, only limping slightly. It must not have been as serious as it seemed back at the river. The dwarf stood in the entryway holding a lantern. "Took you long enough," he growls. "Why didn't you warn us about the fall?" I said, still trying to calm my pounding heart. "You didn't ask," he said with a wicked smile. "It was very rude not to warn us," said Goldie. "Don't tell me about rudeness," he said. "You invoked a curse about the most abominable one to a dwarf." I felt like a stab of guilt invoking a charm that the dwarf thought of as a curse. Of course it was a curse to him. We forced him to help us when he didn't want to. I should have known better. I'd seen people bound by magic before. It's no happy thing. It's always little girls that take our beards and make us do their bidding. Nasty little witches. "What about Snow White?" said Goldie. "The 7 dwarfs were happy to help her." The dwarf muttered something like spoiled brat, and I was suddenly curious about the famous tale of Snow White and how it might be told from a dwarf's point of view. Granny said there was always at least 2 sides to any story, if not a dozen, and clearly the heroine of the tale was not as beloved by the dwarfs as we thought. At least not by this dwarf, anyway. "Let's get moving. I haven't got all day," he said. "Wait," I said. The dwarf turned and glared at me. "Yes, master?" I winced at his words. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but maybe I would try to make things better. "What's your name?" The question spilled out before any thought had happened, but I immediately felt it was the right thing to say. I wasn't sure how meaningful a name would be to a dwarf, but I had a feeling calling him dwarf wasn't an endearment. The dwarf raised his eyebrow. My name is Borland. I wouldn't have guessed that. I thought for certain it was Grumpy, said Goldie. That's not a name. It's a human dwarf insult. Well, it's a name that fits the destiny, said Goldie. Then you'd be called Dopey, Borland said. That's not. Thank you, Borland, I said, cutting Goldie off. We appreciate your help. It means the world to us. Borland turned his back on us and walked down the tunnel, muttering insults, but softly more than before. The tunnel was narrow and dim, and the only light coming from Borland's lantern. After a series of twists and turns, we entered a huge cavern. Huge was not a big enough word. It was enormous, massive, or giant. It was like a mountain, only inside out. The air was extremely warm, though I saw no fires except for torches and sconces on the wall. Ledges and roads zigzagged all along the sides of the cavern, leading to other tunnels, and everywhere there was dwarves, thousands of them. They bore wheelbarrows and pickaxes, and cavern echoed with thumps and pings of mining. It reminded me of the mines in the mountain, only 10 times as big, and the dwarves weren't mining gold, but gems. The wheelbarrows were filled with diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, and crystals of all shades. There were tons of them, heaped up like harvested crops in a field. Some dwarves sorted the gems into bins by their different types and colors. Another team of dwarves poured the gems down chutes, where they were cut and polished and loaded into sacks labeled deep earth emeralds, crushed crystal, fingerling sapphires. We walked by a pile of gems, and Borland picked up a pink pale crystal and bit into it like a carrot. He crunched it, swallowed, and then gave a satisfied belch. I like 'em raw, right out of the ground, he said, and then took another bite. Goldie and I stared at him. You eat the gems? Said Goldie. Of course. Why else would we spend all of our time digging them out of the rock? To wear them? You silly humans. But they're gems, said Goldie. They're valuable. You trade them for anything you want. Why would we trade them when gems are what we want? The only thing I trade for is rubies. Rubies are my favorite. His eyes grew hungry. My hand instinctively flew to Granny's ruby, making sure it was still hidden beneath my dress. I remembered Granny said about dwarves and how they love rubies, but I'd had no idea they liked to eat them. How awful would it be if Borland snatched the ring from me and ate it right in front of my eyes? Are there no rubies found here? I asked curiously. They're very rare and valuable to dwarfs, said Borland. We used to find a small crop of them at least once a month, but their numbers have dwindled over time. It's been years since I've seen a ruby. What I wouldn't give for just one. They have the richest flavor. Borland closed his eyes, probably imagining a glittering ruby the way I thought salivate over a juicy strawberry. Granny's ring felt a little heavier around my neck. Come on, said Borland. I could be searching for rubies right now instead of carrying on with you three. We walked over a narrow ledge. Some of the dwarfs stopped and stared, while others glared, clearly understanding the cruel thing that must have been done to make Borland lead us through their caverns. Borland hung his head in shame as we passed. I felt another stab of guilt. Further and further we went along the ledge. It turned out there was really rivers and fire below us. From up high, we could see them snaking between pillars and bridges, glowing orange and bubbling. No wonder it felt like an oven in here. I guess the dwarves didn't mind the heat, but how could they live in a place like this? Where do you sleep? Goldie asked. We have homes within the cave, said Borland. With beds and baths and tables and things? Of course. What do you take us for? Gnomes? Borland grumbled. We wound in and out of the tunnels for what felt like hours. Some tunnels were rough and dull, while others were smooth and shiny, polished by rivulets of water that snaked down the walls. Some sparkled like millions of tiny gems stuck together, though Borland told us simply ineffective minerals on the stone. On many caverns, the ceilings and the floors were huge stalactites and stalagmites. Sometimes they joined together, creating pillars that would make the caves feel like a palace. I've never imagined the world would look like this underground, said Goldie. I always thought it would just be dirt and worms. It's beautiful, I said. Borland suppressed a smile, clearly pleased by our appreciation of his home. We dwarves have been in these caves for thousands of years before humans existed. Goodness, I never thought there was a time before humans, said Goldie. Borland scoffed. Yes, your species thinks it's quite highly of itself. Think you're kings of the world, don't you? but many noble creatures existed before you. Your wolf friend comes from a line of as ancient as the dwarves, and I dare say will both still exist long after you run yourselves out into extinction. We've gathered more knowledgeable about mysteries of the earth than most have learned in the humans, even more than the witches know. True, said Wolf. Well, you don't have to be so smug about it, I said to Wolf. Finally began to ascend, as last going up instead of in and through and around. Goldie stumbled and fell on my side. I helped her up, but she resisted and slumped against the side of the tunnel. I can't, she whined. We're almost there. Look, I see the light. I helped Goldie to her feet, and she leaned on me as we walked. Creak! Borland cursed. Hurry, he hissed. The tunnels are precarious close to the surface. We walked as quickly as we could, and the circle of light got bigger and bigger. Pebbles and dirt trickled down from the ceiling as the walls groaned some more, and the larger rocks started to fall, rocks as big as my head. Go back! Go back! Borland shouted as we turned and ran in the other direction. The rocks continued to rain down on us. Borland dropped the lantern, and something went dark. I can't see! Ouch! Said Goldie. Wolf yelped. Borland gasped and groaned. And even though I could sense the rocks coming down on me, I felt no pain. It was my cloak. It was protecting me, just as it protected me against the bear and the sprites. Everybody, come to me, I shouted. Goldie and Wolf immediately came and crawled beneath my cloak, but Borland didn't. Borland, I shouted. I reached out blindly, flapping my arms until I slapped his head. Don't touch me. Ah! He gasped as more rocks came down. I'm sorry, but this is for your own good. I snatched him by his beard and jerked him to me, and then spread the cloak over everyone as the rocks shattered down. They bounced and rolled off my hood like a giant hailstone, and then they grew smaller and fewer until there was nothing more than trickles of dust. Is everyone all right, I asked. I think so, squeaked Goldie. Wolf, I said. I felt his nose touch my hand. Borland? There was a muffled grunt. Oh, sorry, Goldie said. She shifted and Borland gasped for breath. Are you all right? Goldie asked. Nearly suffocated me to death. Come on, this way, said Borland. Which way, said Goldie. I can't see a thing. Follow my voice. Keep your hands to the wall. I think we should stay close to Red, said Goldie, just in case there's another cave-in. If you keep quiet and move, there won't be one, snapped Borland. Still, it was safer with Red. Goldie took my hand and Wolf brushed up against my side. I was glad in the dark. Otherwise, they would have seen my eyes getting wet. No one ever told me they felt safer with me before. We turned a corner and there was light, just a faint glow at first, but it got stronger as we walked. I looked at the state of us. We were covered in dust. Wolf was no longer black, but ashy gray. Goldie's golden curls were grayish brown. Even though my cloak was no longer red, it didn't have a single tear to it. It was still whole. We reached the dwarf-sized door. Borland knocked, and in a few moments, another dwarf opened it. This dwarf had twinkly blue eyes, much merrier than Borland's, and a snowy white beard that reached to his potbelly. Borland, said the dwarf, where in the rubies have you been? That takes us to chapter 18. Too hot, too cold, just right. There was a cave-in, said Borland, still breathing hard. Tunnel 203. The white-bearded dwarf clicked his tongue. Third time this century. I suppose we'll have to dig it out again. And what do we have here? A wolf, I see, and humans? Dear Borland, what were you thinking? You hate humans. I don't so much anymore, said Borland sheepishly. Of course you do. They took your beard, didn't they? Twice, I said. Ha, the dwarf said, amused. I'm Rubald. It's a pleasure to meet you. As long as you don't take me by my beard, he chuckled. Come in, before the rest of the tunnel comes down. Borland stepped through the door, followed by Wolf, Goldie, and me. The ceiling of the entryway was so low, I had to hunch over to get in. Eventually, it opened up to a larger room just tall enough for me to stand straight. If I didn't mind the roots that dangled from the ceiling, brushing the top of my head, the walls were veined in larger tree roots, so we couldn't be too far underground. The sight made me hungry for sky and open space. Another dwarf stood in the cavern, stirring something over a kettle of fire. Stewed sapphires, perhaps? Garnet goulash? Romelda, look who showed up, said Rhubarb. The dwarf by the fire turned around. She had long hair and a round, leathery face with dark eyes like Borland's, only hers were softer and warmer. Romilda immediately rushed to Borland and enveloped him in her arms. "My baby, we were so worried." Borland tolerated the hug with much patience as a wriggly toddler. "I'm fine, Mother. Let me go." "Your mother?" said Goldie. Borland's mother looked up at Goldie and her gaze sharpened. "Borland, my child, why under earth did you bring humans to our home? You hate humans." They took him by the beard, said Rhubarb cheerfully. "Not again," Romilda chided. "Didn't you learn anything the last time this happened? I told you every day for the 200 years you mustn't go above ground. Rhubarb, can't you talk some sense into your son?" We can't keep him in the cradle forever, Romilda, dear," said his dad. "He has to walk on his own 2 feet sometime, even if it's above the ground." "But he's frightfully young for ventures. Children reach their hundreds and think they're all grown up, ready to take on the world." "How old are you?" Goldie asked, and although I suspected it wasn't polite to ask, I was a little curious too. 276, said Borland. "Impossible. No one could live that long." "Huh, I'm 903, said his dad. "Romilda's about to crack 1,000. "Golly grasshoppers," said Goldie, "you're older than trees. Red, did you know dwarfs could live that long?" "No, I didn't," I said. "Rhubarb, it isn't polite to speak of dwarfs' age in front of humans," said Romilda. "It makes them feel perishable." "Oh, I beg your pardon," said Rhubarb. I wasn't offended. My mind buzzed with their centuries of life. Could dwarves live longer? Was there a secret to their long lives? Might one share? "You must be starving," said Romilda. In the center of the room was a squat stone table and 3 chairs. On the table were 3 bowls. "I'm starving," said Goldie. She ran to the table, snatched the bowl, and started guzzling. Immediately spat it out, what she had just ate. Tiny pebbles shot across the room. "It's far too gravely," she said. She took the next bowl and tried to take a sip, but abruptly put it down. "Rock solid." "Try this one, dear," Romilda set another bowl on the table that was full of grayish-brown goop. Goldie took a sip, smacked her lips, and drained the bowl in 5 seconds and finished with a belch. "It could use a touch of honey, but it slides down well." The 3 dwarfs gaped at her. "Why don't you sit down for supper?" said Romilda, politely ignoring Goldie's rudeness. "Oh, yes, my legs are about to fall off." Goldie flopped down in a chair and squirmed, and then moved to another. She tested all the chairs until she settled in a little golden rocker and relaxed. "Yes, this is perfect." She rocked back and forth. But, stuttered Borland. There, dear," said his mother. "I've made your favorite tonight, roasted sapphires." "That's not my favorite," said Borland, and I knew he was wishing for rubies. Granny's ring seemed to prick my chest. Meanwhile, Romilda served Borland and Rhubarb the sapphires like a pile of roasted vegetables, then dished out 3 bowls of gloopy stuff for Goldie, and then had slurped up before. They were called strog. Their weak stomachs couldn't handle their gems, I know, but any tiny creature can eat strog, even wolves. The strog was very salty, sort of porridge-like, with a dusty aftertaste, but at least it went down easily. Goldie downed another bowl in 5 seconds and asked for more, after which she launched into her usual heap of questions. "Do dwarves only eat gems? Do you have other foods, like wood chips, coal? And what does it affect your inner workings?" The dwarf's cheeks turned noticeably red. I choked on what I was eating. "Goldie, you can't ask that." "Why not? Mummy says if there's something we don't know, we always should ask. Otherwise, how else are we to learn anything?" "I don't think the advice includes questions about your inner workings." "Of course it does. How many living things do you know that eat rocks?" "I find it fascinating," Goldie said, yawning. "Excuse me, I'm sleepy all of a sudden." You are welcome to rest in one of our beds," said Rhubarb, "although you may not find them to your liking." The dwarf beds were actually little alcoves carved right into the walls. Goldie crawled into one and quickly got out. "How can you sleep there? It feels like rocks." "Works out the kinks in my back," said Rhubarb. Goldie crawled into another and promptly slid out. "That doesn't seem safe." "I'm a light sleeper," said Romilda. "I like 'em smooth." Borland piped up, "Just stay out of my..." But Goldie had already crawled into the 3rd bed, which was smaller, and she immediately curled up in a ball and wrapped herself with her shawl around her like a blanket. "Oh yes, this is cozy. There's a human in my bed," Borland said. Rhubarb laughed gleefully. There, Borley dear," said Romilda. "I'll make you a cozy bed on the floor next to mine." With Goldie asleep, it became very quiet, and I realized that 3 dwarfs had their attention on me. "So," said his father, "what brings you to our caverns? Only a very knowledgeable human would know how to take a dwarf by the beard, and only a strange request would bring you through our caves." "I asked Borland to take me to the enchanted castle to find the red roses." Rhubarb nodded. "We dwarves have long admired the castle. The gargoyles have ruby eyes, and it's said to be full of magical wonders, such as the red roses that you seek." "Then you've used them," I said. "That's why dwarves live so long, isn't it?" "Oh, it would be perfect knowing how one could use the rose without too many ill effects. Maybe the enchantment is what made the dwarves eat rocks. That would be okay, wouldn't it? Eating rocks in order to live longer seemed like a fair trade to me. Or maybe the roses were what made the dwarves dwarves. Would Granny mind being a dwarf and eating rocks? Would I?" But Rhubarb shook his head. "Dwarves have long lives naturally. We've never desired eternal life, so we don't seek it. Our gems keep us strong for a good long time. When we reach the end, we're content to go to sleep, turn to dust and stone, maybe even gems." I made a face. "So dwarves eat each other?" Rhubarb laughed. "When humans die, they turn to dirt and all kinds of edible plants that grow out of the dirt. So I suppose you could say we're all eating each other. Life moves in a continuous circle." "It doesn't feel that way," I said. "Not when someone dies." "Let me show you something." Rhubarb walked behind me and stood directly in front of the wall. I hadn't noticed before, but the walls of the caves were covered with drawings and writings, maps drawn with astonishing detail. There were paths twisting around trees, climbing mountains, reaching to different destinations, most of which I had never seen of such. The boiling bogs and the serpentine seas and the hidden islands. Some paths were written directions such as, "Take 7 steps to the left. After reaching the cliffs, don't eat the yellow berries. Poison." It reminded me of Granny's table, with all of her recipes etched into wood. I traced my path to the stream where I had met Borland, down by the river and the mountain and the wine well, which were also marked, and then back up the river where we are now, Dwarf Caverns, and more specifically, home, marked with a red X. Further down the wall, I found my home. That was the village, and mine, and even Granny's house, a little cottage labeled the Witch of the Woods. I placed my hand over Granny's house and felt a deep pang of missing her. How much deeper would it hurt if she were gone forever? "You humans seem to fear the end of life," said Rhubarb, as though he was reading my thoughts. "It's a curse to you, no?" "It's not a pleasant thing," I said. "If it were a way to keep living, I think it would be better." "And so you seek the red roses," he said. "I seek a way to save Granny. We tried the wine well, but it all went wrong. Goldie drank the wine and lost a bit of her memory, you see." "Borland," shouted his mother, "did you send these girls to the wine well on purpose?" Borland looked away from his mother, face flushed. "You naughty little dwarf, you knew what would happen if they drank it." "So they took me by my beard. And that's your own fault for going above ground. Now you apologize this instant." She grabbed him by the beard herself and set him down before me. Borland glared at his feet. "Sorry," he spat. "If anyone should apologize, it's me. It was rude of me to take you by the beard. I realize that now, but I need your help. You mentioned another way too, besides the red roses. You called it the magic hearts, but I don't see anything anywhere on the map about it." Rhubarb stiffened. Romilda gasped. "Borland, you didn't." Borland crossed his arms. I didn't tell her anything except a name, and besides, there's nothing to tell. We don't know any more than they do. Not really. "I don't understand. Do the hearts exist?" "Yes, but..." His father glanced at the maps. "I'm not certain the Witch of the Woods would prefer that kind of magic. What do you think, Borland? You met her." Borland's eyes narrowed at Rhubarb. "What do you mean? You don't mean Granny? Didn't she ever tell you about a dwarf she met once and took by the beard?" "You mean it was Borland," said Romilda. "Must have been 70 years ago when Borland was just out of the cradle. Little troublemaker snuck away from me the first chance he got, and then got caught by a witch. He stole my gems." "She stole my gems," said Borland. "That's not right. Granny said the wolf stole gems from the prince. Granny was just taking them back." "The prince stole the gems from me," snapped Borland. "So I was taking them back from the prince, and then your dear Granny took me by the beard and made me give them to her." "Why would a prince steal gems? He's a prince." Berlin raised one eyebrow. Have you ever heard of the greedy royal? I swallowed my words. I certainly had. King Bartholomew Archibald Reginald Fife was greedy as they came. His greed had nearly destroyed the kingdom. It was completely destroyed him, but that's a different tale. Your granny didn't even want to listen to my side of the story, said Berlin. My head whirled. Granny hadn't told me all this. I was starting to wonder about other things I didn't know about Granny. I'm sorry my Granny caused such trouble for you. I'm sorry I caused so much trouble. Berlin gave a grunt. It sounded like an acceptance of my apology. Now, what of the magic hearts? Can you tell me anything? Romilda and Rhubarb looked at each other. We've heard the rumors, so we know nothing for certain. Only those who have actually used the magic would know. It's Berlin's bedtime, said Romilda, clearly ready to change this conversation. You've had far too much time of excitement for one day. Berlin grumbled and yawned at the same time. Wolf was curled up near the fire, and Goldie was snoring from Berlin's bed. Romilda placed a slab of rock at the side of her bed for Berlin and tucked him in among the flat stones as though they were fluffy pillows. She sang him a lullaby about a girl who cut through 10 miles of stone and found a single ruby and lived 10,000 years. Berlin fell asleep with a smile on his face. Rhubarb and I sat in silence for a while as Romilda went about readying herself for bed. Eventually he spoke. Death can be a hard thing even for dwarfs, said Rhubarb. When a young dwarf dies, even at 100 years, we mourn gratefully. He looked at Borden as he spoke. I suppose I can empathize on your quest, though we dwarfs have a saying, let the rocks fall where they may. It means sometimes we must follow things to happen as they will. And sometimes we have to fix things, I said. Sometimes we have to stop the bad things from happening. We both are right, said Rhubarb. The true wisdom lies in knowing what we can fix and what we must let go. I didn't have the energy to respond. All I knew was I couldn't give up. Granny wasn't a rock that I could toss aside. She was a precious gem to me, like a ruby to a dwarf, only I needed this one badly. I lay down next to Wolf and curled my head into the crook of his stomach. He placed a paw on my shoulder. Good night, Wolf, I said. Wolf's ears twitched a little, and I felt his contentment. It washed through me, loosened all the knots inside my head, and it fell into a soft, restful slumber. And that takes us to the next chapter, which we'll read tomorrow. Have a good night.